As you may have seen from the announcement, gentlemen, the limited banner is about to be released soon, and you will also be given 100 free pulls and you must use it, otherwise will expired when their banner is ended. My suggestion is to spend them for a chance to obtain B Himari. First, let us talk about her. She is a TS unit, which means that once summoned, they either provide buffs, heal allies, or deal damage to enemies, in case you had forgotten what TS means. Unlike other summoned units that remain stationary, TS units can move freely, engage the nearest enemy, and provide support until their duration expires, or their HP is depleted. In this case, B Himari provides a piercing buff to allies while also applying an increased weakness damage debuff. This means that if a boss is affected by this debuff and gets hit by an attack type it is weak against, it will receive even more damage. And yes, this debuff applies to any attack or armor type, instead of being limited to piercing attacks or heavy armor only. I am assuming that this debuff will become extremely important in the near future. Aside from that, her basic skill and sub-skill are also incredibly strong. B Himari has already proven to be very useful against Bina, and most lunatic runs heavily rely on her. Not only that, B Himari is also useful against almost any raid boss that uses heavy armor, and probably Grand Assault as well. Because of that, it is genuinely difficult to skip B Himari if you care about heavy raid content, especially if you are a highly competitive or hardcore player. If you are not, however, and are more into casual and less complicated runs, I would still say that B Himari is valuable, but try not to force yourself into prioritizing her over the Fest banner. You should only continue pulling beyond the free 100 pulls if you have spare Pyrex that is not reserved for the 5th Fest banner. She is simply too good to ignore for piercing content, and currently she is the only piercing supporter who perfectly fits the role of both the best piercing buffer and debuffer. Aside from Bina, Hud, Cheesed, Wackerboat, and any possible Grand Assault bosses with heavy armor will most likely require B Himari to deal with effectively. Although I am still waiting to see whether the majority of players will consistently use B Himari for those raids. For now I am assuming she will become highly relevant very soon. As for the other banner, B Rio is more focused on being an explosive urban DPS meant to replace Dihina against light armor bosses. However, she requires extremely heavy investment in order to perform properly. If you are casual enough and believe Dihina can already solve your problems against light armor bosses, then yes, you do not really need B Rio, as she is more intended for competitive or hardcore players. I still find B Rio somewhat difficult to fully evaluate, but to put it simply, she feels like another case of Maid Aris all over again. But hey, she does have a passive debuff that applies increased weakness damage taken, though only if the enemy has light armor. Sounds nice just like B Himari, but since it only applies to a specific armor type, in this case light armor, then naturally it will mainly excel there. So anyway, to conclude, B Rio is a strong explosive DPS for urban terrain that replaces Dihina, but she requires very heavy investment. She also has a nice sub-skill where she passively applies a debuff that increases weakness damage taken, though only against light armor enemies. If this sounds unfamiliar to you, it works similarly to Nagisa, whose defense debuff only affects light armor enemies. Judging purely on paper, I am assuming she will end up similar to Maid Aris, requiring significant malding and repeated retries until you go bald. If that is not a problem for you, then she should be perfectly fine. Now, let us talk about the builds. For B Himari, all of her gear should probably be maximized, as she is a TS unit and requires better survivability to sustain hits and damage so she does not retreat immediately. The necklace can also improve her small healing capability, not by a massive amount, but still enough to help your DPS an additional hit before they ends up going down. As for stars, I did test her at 4 stars, and it was already enough to clear difficulties below lunatic. The majority of players usually raise her only to 5 stars or UE30. UE40 is a nice upgrade since it increases her max HP, which further improves her survivability if you feel she is not durable enough. But then again, that decision is entirely up to you. If 5 stars is not enough, then UE40 would be the next reasonable option. Anything beyond UE40, however, would likely become a massive waste of investment. So, be careful with that. As for Rio, she essentially needs to be fully upgraded in order to properly compete with Hina for urban terrain. Max gear level, high UE investment, max level and skills. She requires an extremely large amount of investment specifically for urban light armor raids. But realistically, the majority of players will probably just borrow that one person who already fully maximized their Rio build for efficient urban light armor raid bosses. And surely, everyone else is thinking exactly the same way, so that is pretty much it. My suggestion is to spend the free 100 pulls on Himari, but remember, do not rush your pulls. Who knows, you might obtain one of them entirely from the free pulls. If you are not interested in raid content and only pull for waifu reasons, then the choice is entirely yours. After all, here we have beautifully crafted cakes and gigantic milkshakes. Should you spark? If you have enough spare Pyrex prepared for the fest banner, then yes. If not, there is no need to force it. And that should be all. As always, Godspeed.